Hey everyone, Shariar with Madrona Labs here. The sounds you just heard were created from this single harp note. I analyzed and resynthesized this in Vutu and then imported it in Sumu. In this video, I'm going to go over the process for using Vutu and Sumu to turn this single harp sample into some lush pads. Let's get started. So what we're going to do here is get a sound loaded in Vutu and processed, so that it's ready to be used as an oscillator in Sumu. The most important part of this next step is to set the fundamental frequency dial over here to reflect the root note or fundamental of your sample. For this tutorial, let's leave the default settings in place and click Analyze so Vutu does its thing. We can now see a visual representation of the analysis Vutu has done. You can get some really interesting sounds by experimenting with these settings here on the left. But for now, let's click Synthesize so we can hear the resynthesized version. There's some very interesting noise artifacts here at the end of the sample that we can use later on to make weird sounds in Sumu. Let's get this resynthed file exported out of Vutu and imported into Sumu. I've got the default patch loaded up here in Sumu. Let's get our processed harp sample into the partials module over here by clicking on these three little dots right here to bring up the import pop-up. Next, I'm going to navigate over to the folder I put my partial in. I highly advise keeping all your partials in this specific folder format so that Sumu imports them in neatly. Now let's navigate over to our exported partials folder and click OK. This will import the whole My Partials folder into Sumu for us to use. Now let's start building our patch. First, I'm moving the time output from the input module to the variable input and turning the scale way down. This slows down the playback of the harp sound so that the attack is kind of smeared, and the sustain goes on almost indefinitely. This will let us turn the harp sound into a long pad. Now I'm introducing FM into the oscillator module by turning up the mod index and finding a ratio that sounds good. In the oscillators module, each partial is played back with one FM pair. Here we're setting the ratios of each pair of oscillators to 4. This gives the harp sound a much more sawtooth-like timbre with plenty of harmonics. Attaching the time to the mod index is an interesting trick that will gradually turn up the intensity of the FM over time as each note is played. The pulses module in this patch is free running to generate a lot of short events. Because of the shape set in the shapes column, each of these events is a short rising envelope. I'm using these envelopes to turn up the speed of each oscillator's motion through whichever vector field I have selected in the field menu. By trying different settings in the home and field menus, you can generate a wide variety of different motion patterns that create different kinds of stereo effects. Finally, I've set the filter to a slow pass mode and adjusted the cutoff to tame the harmonics and give a subtle lift to each note. Tying the whole sound together with the filter rounds off some of the digital edges and lets our patch mix well with other sounds, but also leaves in the rich spatial motion that Sumu really shines at. Thanks for watching. We hope you've enjoyed this short Vutu and Sumu tutorial. Check back or subscribe for more in-depth Sumu tutorials, and meanwhile, enjoy the sounds.